Hey, Beastista here, and welcome to week 5 of the VDL. This week we're playing against the St. Lucie Luxrays, and we are hoping to get our 4th win of the season, and let's get into the matchup. So looking at my opponent's team, the first thing that you should look at when you look at their team is we can see Bronzong, Metagross, and Mr. Mime. All 3 of those Pokemon are psychic, and they can do incredibly good damage to my team. In addition to that, they also have Piloswine, which is very good at dealing damage to my team because ground is also one of my common weaknesses. So with that, I definitely think that their team is pretty concerning. But in addition to that, they also have Pincurchin, which underspeeds my entire team in Trick Room. And in addition, they have Fletchling, which allows them to have priority Tailwind if they want to try to outspeed me that way. So those are kind of some of the noteworthy things. Looking at my opponent, my team, and their team, we can see that Skuntank seems very good because the combination that they have a lot of Pokemon that have still psychic coverage and are psychic, and the dark community is really relevant. They also don't have many dark resist. They actually only have one Pokemon that resists a dark move, and that's Hitmonchan. In addition to that, I can see that Slowking also seems like it's going to be pretty relevant because it is my only other Pokemon that does not take super effective damage from psychic coverage, and that can be very relevant. Other than that, Naganadel does outspeed my opponent's entire team, and so it can be pretty useful in that manner. So let's get into the team I brought. So here's the team I decided to bring. So first I bring Slowking. Slowking has Regenerator, Black Sludge, Protect, Nasty Plot, Shadow Ball, and Trick Room. Ghost coverage is pretty good at their team. They only have one Ghost immunity, and it's Fletchling. Other than that, it also does super effective damage into some of the big threats, namely Metagross and Bronzong. But other than that, I made it very bulky, so it should survive 2 hits from Metagross if it's not holding an offensive item. And in addition to that, I also should be able to one-shot Metagross at +2 with a Nasty Plot on Shadow Ball, assuming that it's not incredibly specially defensive or assuming it's not an Assault Vest. But that definitely is pretty good. So next we went with Naganadel. I decided to go with Choice Specs Naganadel. This Naganadel was not quite doing as much damage output as I'd like, and because there doesn't seem a consistency in this type of move that's going to be covered because it might hit ground or psychic coverage, I decided that using a damage resisting barrier didn't seem particularly relevant, so I decided to go with Choice Specs, and I gave it Dragon, Poison, and Fire coverage. Fire Blast specifically over Fire Flamethrower because that should be able to one-shot Metagross where Flamethrower almost never, if never, does, depending on their specific bulk. Next we did Wheezing. So Wheezing I brought mainly because Neutralizing Gas seemed pretty relevant. It can deal with electric terrain from Pincurchin. It can deal with heat proof from the Bronzong, which can make Fire Blast and Overheat and my other Pokemon do more damage into some of their Pokemon that can do that. It also deals with Sarina, preventing me from having priority moves and other things like that. Other than that, I gave it Dark coverage because Dark hits almost everything on their team for at least neutral, and Pain Split because Weezing's definitely going to take quite a bit of damage, and I can hopefully be able to, hopefully be able to kind of gain back and do quite a bit of damage to my opponent's team. Other than that, I kind of just gave it Protect because, why not? Next we go to Mungus. Mungus I gave Foul Play. So Foul Play seems very good this week because Foul Play is a clean 2-shot into Metagross if Metagross is max attack. In addition, it also only has 1 resist, and so it's going to do a lot more damage than most other moves would do. Other than that, I gave it Protect, Rage Powder, and Spore with the Citrus Berry, so Metagross should take most hits and gain a little health back, and then I can hopefully either make things go to sleep or, deal some good damage depending on the specific Pokemon. Next is Salazzle. So Salazzle I gave Focus Sash, Protect, and Fake Out, which is pretty straightforward. I gave it Overheat specifically because it does enough damage to one-shot most Metagrosses. And then Sludge Bomb, it just kind of coverage because so Fire and Poison coverage actually hits everything on my opponent's team that is a Psychic Pokemon for super effective because they're Steel Pokemon are their psychic Pokemon are still in Fairy, and so it actually hits both Mr. Mime, Bronzong, and Metagross for super effective damage to that combination. Finally, I went with Skuntank. I gave it dark glasses or black glasses to increase dark moves damage, and I gave it Foul Play, Crunch, Sucker Punch, and Protect. So this is going to do quite a good damage to everything on my opponent's team except for Hitmonchan, but he even does reasonable damage to Hitmonchan. I gave it black glasses specifically because Foul Play with black glasses on Skuntank is a guaranteed one shot into Metagross if it's max attack. In addition, I gave it Sucker Punch for some priority and then Crunch for some Pokemon that have weak attacks. For example, some stuff like Rotom and things like that. So so that's my team. I feel like it's definitely not the easiest matchup. I think it's definitely tricky, but hopefully I'm able to position myself and be able to get the win. Let's get into our match. Here we are for game one. So looking at my opponent's team, we see that they brought their slow team, which is Bronzong, Piloswine, Pincurchin, and they also brought Metagross and Mr. Mime for their extra 2 Psychic Pokemon and Rotom Heat. So looking at my team, I definitely think that Salazzle seems very good because it's guaranteed Fake Out on turn 1. It also can do pretty good damage to Piloswine, Metagross, and Bronzong. And I decided to go with Nagano because it should outspeed everything, and it should get pretty reasonable damage into anything on my opponent's team. And so in the back, I'm kind of debating whether or not I want... I definitely want Skuntank because of the 3 Psychic Pokemon. The main question is, do I want a Moongus or Slowking? A Moongus is probably a little bit better at disrupting, but Slowking definitely is better damage output and seems pretty good in Trick Room if they decide to set up Trick Room. So I decide to set up Slowking. Also, Moongus seems a little bit questionable if they have Electric Terrain up, which can definitely make Spore, which makes Spore not great. So I decided to go with Slowking. My opponent leads Bronzong and Rotom. And I lead my Salazzle Nagano. So here the main question is do I think they're going, or like, what do I think they're going to do? I decide I'm just going to Fake Out into the Bronzong because I would rather them not set up Trick Room here on turn 1. And I debating between whether or not I should attack Rotom or Bronzong, and I decided to split up my damage and Draco Meteor into the Rotom because there's a reasonable chance they might protect into the Bronzong, and also Fire Blast is not going to do as much damage as they would like if they are heat proof. So here they end up protecting Bronzong, which is not too surprising, but I definitely feel like I definitely should have faked out there just to be safe. And we Draco Meteor into the Rotom. If Rotom's not particularly bulky, this is a one-shot. But if it is pretty bulky, then it definitely can be as low damage as that. And so this Rotom's definitely very high special defense bulk and probably max HP. We can definitely see that they don't have a lot of special attack because that Rising Voltage is very little into my Salazzle. And so here we decided to overheat into the Bronzong. And because I'm choice locked, Draco Meteor is not going to do much into Bronzong, so the main question is, should I switch it out or should I just go for the kill on Rotom? And I decide to go for the kill on Rotom. So we Draco Meteor into the Rotom, and it ends up getting the KO. It's a little bit sad that I actually have to run max speed to outspeed their Inteleon, and so my Beast Boost is actually a speed boost instead of a special attack boost. And here we overheat into the Bronzong, and it does pretty good damage, but it was a little bit sad that it's not a 2-hit KO, but this also guarantees that it's heat proof. And they end up setting up Psychic Terrain, which is definitely something I did not expect to see, but seems like a pretty reasonable decision. So my opponent brings up Piloswine. And so here I'm definitely expecting an Expanding Force, and that is going to kill both my Pokemon. And my -4 Nagano is going to do very little damage here. So the question is definitely whether or not I should protect and switch out or double switch. And so I decide to go for the double switch. And the main question is just which position do I want to switch them in.
and I decided to switch the Skunk Tank into my Salazzle and my Nagano into Slowking. So we switch out Nagano and Slowking. And Skunk Tank from the Skunk. And so they set up Light Screen, which definitely I was not expecting from Paloswine. I was maybe expecting that from Bronzong, but definitely not, a little bit strange. So they do Expanding Force, and Skunk Tank gets a free switch in, and Slowking takes pretty low, not a lot of damage, and the Black Sludge Hill is pretty good. And so here the main question is, should I be targeting Bronzong or Paloswine? And I decided to target the Bronzong, and I decided to just get a nasty plot up, because in Light Screen my Slowking is not going to do much damage, and I definitely need the extra damage output. So they protect Bronzong, which definitely is pretty annoying on my side. And the Crunch gets protected by the block, and then they high horsepower into my Skunk Tank. So my Skunk Tank is quite hurt now, but I do get +2 onto my Slowking. And so here I'm just thinking, is there's a reasonable switch in? And the answer is there's not a good switch in. So the main question is, should I attack or protect? I decided to Foul Play into the Paloswine and Shadow Ball into the Bronzong. Shadow Ball would kill if it wasn't for Light Screen, but definitely doesn't kill now. My opponent protects with Bronzong, so they successfully got a double protect off, which is definitely a little bit annoying that ends up being the case. And Foul Play does okay damage, but definitely not as much as I would have liked. And their high horsepower ends up killing the Skunk Tank. And the Shadow Ball goes into their Protect. So here I bring into Nagano. Honestly speaking, this is probably a misplay. I think I should probably brought in the Salazzle so I could just go for a double protect and stall out Light Screen. But now that the Nagano's in, the main question is what should I be attacking? I decide that I probably should go for the Paloswine, and I should Fire Blast if it's not Thick Bat, but I think it's likely Thick Bat. And so I decided it's probably better to just Draco Meteor into it. And Shadow Ball into the Bronzong, which definitely shouldn't protect since it protected the last 2 turns. They protect into the Mamoswine, which I probably could have maybe played around, but ends up definitely getting me a little there. And they Expanding Force into the Slowking and Nagano. They crit Nagano, which 100% did not matter. That was going to kill no matter what. But I am able to get the Shadow Ball off into the Bronzong spot. And get a little bit more health with the Black Sludge. And so here we see that they lost their terrain, and I bring in Salazzle. And so I definitely can imagine a situation where I fake out and Shadow Ball, but because Slowking is actually slower than both my opponent's Pokemon, it doesn't seem like a great decision, because if they protect, it, definitely in bad shape. And so I decide that I actually think the correct decision is to protect the Salazzle, bait some attacks, and I see that I'm debating between attacking and not, and so I end up going for the attack into the Paloswine, because Paloswine cannot be killed right now. And they end up high horsepowering into the Salazzle and going up for Psychic Terrain, which I definitely am pretty happy with. In all honesty, I think it's pretty fine that they go for it. And we're able to get a Shadow Ball off into the Paloswine. And get a little more health from the Black Sludge. And their Light Screen's finally up. So here, I cannot let them get another light screen up. If they get another light screen up, the game is definitely over. There's no question about that. And so the main question is can Overheat kill the Paloswine? And it seems like a roll at best, but I think I have to go for it. And then I debating between Shadow Balling into Paloswine to guarantee its KO or just go for the Bronzong, and I just go for the Bronzong. So we overheat into the Paloswine, and it does end up getting the KO, which is really good. And they end up getting an Expanding Force, which does quite a bit of damage into my Slowking because of its crit. It's definitely pretty annoying, but I do get the Shadow Ball into the Bronzong, killing it. So now it's a 1v1, and I'm expecting Metagross in the back, which I think right now I'm feeling pretty good. The idea is that I think I should be able to take an attack from Metagross if it's not Life Orb, and like I mentioned in the team preview, I train my Slowking to at +2 one-shot of Metagross as long as it's not Assault Vest. And so here, I go for the Protect to get a little bit more HP, so to increase the odds that I survive an attack from Metagross. And they Stomping Tantrum. And so here, I feel pretty good. I'm at pretty much around 50%, which is about what I should be able to take. And I feel like I should be able to get this KO at being at +2. So we Shadow Ball into the Metagross. They Stomping Tantrum into the Slowking, and I just barely survive. And we get the Shadow Ball off into the Metagross, and Metagross takes it. And I found out that later that I checked that I actually messed up the EV spread, and that actually does not KO Metagross. And so it's definitely a little bit sad because I think that I definitely could have gotten there if I would have had the better EV spread to guarantee that KO, but sadly I did not. And so I definitely end up losing the game. It was definitely very close. I think that if I made one decision different, probably could have gotten there, or if I would have maybe if my Slowking was a little bit differently bred, it would have gotten there, but they ended up getting there, and it was an incredibly close match. Let's get into match 2. Here we are for match 2. So last game was very close. I felt like it was pretty close. However, Nagano doesn't seem like the best lead. So I think I'm just going to go with Salazzle and Skuntank because I think that seems like a pretty good lead. And the main question is, what do I like in the back? Like I can see an argument for all 4 of my Pokemon. Amoonguss is very good. If I can set up Tailwind, Weezing seems pretty good at dealing with the Thick Fat and the Heat Proof that the Bronzong and Paloswine had, which definitely made some of the damage from Salazzle not as good. And you know, Nagano outspeeding their team is pretty good, and Slowking being able to set up Trick Room or being good in Trick Room seems pretty good. I decided to go with Slowking and Nagano, which is the same 4 I brought last time, but in a slightly different order. I don't know if this is honestly a good or bad decision, but you know, I decided to make it. My opponent leads Rotom Bronzong, the same lead as last game, and I lead Salazzle Skuntank. So here, I'm expecting Psychic Terrain and Overheat into my Skuntank, or alternatively, Protect on Bronzong and Overheat. So the main question is do I protect Skuntank or just go for the attack? So I decided to foul play into the Bronzong in case they end up not protecting. because it's going to do quite a bit of damage, and I decided to fake out into the Rotom to play around and protect from Bronzong, which I think is pretty reasonable. So they end up protecting the Bronzong, and I fake out into the Rotom. So overall, this turn could have gone better for me, but pretty much, you know, nothing really happened. We kind of just stalled turn 1. And so here, the main question is do I want to target Bronzong or Rotom? I decide to go for the Bronzong spot and also overheat it because it just protected. This should do quite a bit of damage. So we overheat it, getting it a little bit over 50%, and hopefully this foul play is enough to kill it. And we see that we're able to get the KO with the double hit, double up. Definitely feel pretty good about that at this point. They also overheat into my Skunk Tank, which takes a little bit under 50%, and now Rotom's at -2 special attack. And they bring in the Paloswine. So here, I decide that I'm just going to foul play into the Paloswine spot. And debating between Sludge Bomb and the Rotom, overheating into the Paloswine, or switching out. And I decide to go for the switch because I think Fake Out will be relevant later, and Salazzle has a good matchup into the Metagross. So we switch to Slowking. And the foul play goes into the Paloswine, and it does reasonable damage, not great. The overheat at -2 goes into the Skunk Tank, and Skunk Tank kicks that quite well. And they set up Light Screen. So Slowking did get a free switch in, but you know, I think it's pretty good. So here I'm like, okay, I want to attack the Rotom spot, and I'm debating between Crunch, Foul Play. Crunch does more damage than the Rotom. However, I think this is a misplay because my opponent is likely to switch it out because Rotom's at -4 special attack right here. And if I would have switched, did Foul Play instead of Crunch into this, Metagross would have switched in, and I would have gotten a clean one-hit KO and probably would have taken a commanding position here. However, we do see that Crunch does do 50% damage, and the high horsepower goes into Slowking, which does quite a bit of damage, and a nasty plot to increase my damage output. So here, I want to go after the Metagross. Metagross is likely going to be killed by another Crunch, or should die to another Crunch, and definitely dies to another Foul Play. I think that I should likely Crunch into the Metagross because it's a clean KO and also plays around a switch in to the Rotom. However, I end up clicking Foul Play into the Metagross spot. And here we end up protecting Slowking to get a little bit of HP and to make sure it survives the turn. They do end up switching out Metagross into the Rotom, and we Foul Play instead of Crunch, and so we see that we could have done quite a bit more damage because Crunch does a lot more damage than Foul Play does into the Rotom. And the high Vesper ends up getting a Skunk Tank, which is another good example of when Aftermath would have been really relevant. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned. Yeah, so I was debating between Stench and Aftermath and Skunk Tank. I decided Stench, and Aftermath would have procced both games, and that would have been very good damage into the Paloswine right there. So I bring out Salazzle, and here I decide I should just fake out into the Paloswine, and I would like to set up a Trick Room if like something like a Mungus was in the back, because if Mungus is not in the back, I definitely should just attack. Rotom shouldn't be able to kill my Slowking from this position, no matter what it does. And so the main question is what I target. I think that I know that Paloswine has Protect. I don't know if Rotom has Protect. I think it's probably optimal to attack into Shadow Ball. However, I attack into Paloswine even though it seems like a reasonable decision for them to protect because I just brought out a Pokemon with Fake Out. And so I definitely think that's another mistake on my end. third consecutive turn of a misplay, in my opinion. We fake out the Palestine spot, which I think is a fair decision. However, the Rising Voltage goes into the Slazzle spot, and Shadow Ball is also into the Palestine. And so here, pretty much the question is how many turns of Trick Room are up, and we see it's the last turn of Trick Room, and so I think it's a pretty safe to kind of just protect and hope, install the turn out of Trick Room. So I decided to protect with the Salazzle and also protect with the Slowking. So we get a double protect up. And we see that they overheat into the Slowking spot, and they high horsepower into the Slowking spot. I definitely think that my decision to double protect is correct, but definitely a little bit sad that they doubled up into that spot, so I could have had a pretty clean free switch in or a clean attack. However, I think, it ends up being fine. So here, the main question is do I think that, or like what I think is the optimal offensive moves to do, and I think I should probably go for the overheat into the Palestine. And the Shadow Ball into the Rotom. Make sure to split it up in case Palestine protects. So we get the overheat off, and it does quite good damage. And sadly, we can see that if I had over or aftermath in Skunktake, it actually would have Palestine would be dead right there instead of it being alive. I take a Shadow Ball from Slowking, which I take pretty well, and then the high horsepower doubles up into Slowking, killing it. Definitely a little sad that Slowking died, but I can definitely see a path to victory, even though it doesn't seem like a very likely path to victory here.
So that path of victory is the possibility that overheat into Palestine kills Palestine, and Draco Meteor into Rotom kills Rotom. There's definitely a chance, depending on the bulk of Rotom, that survives this. However, it's definitely completely possible that I can kill it. So we see they protect Mamoswine, which is okay if I'm able to get the KO with Draco Meteor. I end up missing Draco Meteor, which definitely seals the game up pretty much because this Rotom should be able to kill my Salazzle. And Salazzle dies. So I definitely feel like this game was quite close, even though, even though it ends up being a 3-0 at the end. I feel like if I would have made any of those plays I mentioned earlier correctly, I probably could have gotten there. And obviously, if I would have been able to get a crit, I might have been able to get there here or there. In all honesty, one of the big things in this match is just if I would have been able to set up, if I had Aftermath with Skunktake, I actually might have been able to win this game as well. The game definitely was very close. So we ended up Draco Meteor into Rotom because I was curious to see if this would have actually killed. We see that it ended up not having killed. It looks like there's a chance I could have got it to kill if it was rolled a little higher. But I did go ahead and killed here. My opponent definitely had a great bring this week, but overall, I think this was a very hard matchup with Paloswine and 3 Psychic Pokemon. They only ended up bringing 2 of them, but the 2 that they brought are definitely hard for my team to deal with, especially because the most efficient way to deal with Paloswine and Bronzong and Metagross on my team, honestly, is going to be fire damage, and 2 of the 3 have the ability to make them neutral to fire damage. But overall, I think my opponent did quite well, and I'm definitely a little bit sad with some of my decisions I've made, and maybe a little bit of the prep. And I definitely think I could have gotten there, but that's what happens when you play against, play a match like that. The person who plays better ends up winning, especially in a match where you have a slight team advantage, in my opinion. So, anyways, thank you for watching, and hopefully I can get it next week.